Today I'm going to be taking a look at my first SUF. For those of you who don't know, it's made by the same guy who runs Sarpaniva watches. So it's kind of a cool watch, maybe a little bit boring to some, but let's take a look at it. We have a diameter of 38.5, lug to lug of just under 46, a height of 8.6, and a lug width of 20 millimeters. Some other general specifications for the watch here. We're going to have the Soprod A10 movement beating way in here. It's a pretty good movement, operating at around 28,800 vibrations per hour, 42-hour power reserve. Mine's been running at about plus 4 seconds a day, which is pretty good, no complaints. We also have 100 meters of stated water resistance, but without a screw-down crown, it's just a regular push-pull. We have an ever so slightly boxed, like barely boxed at all, sapphire crystal. And they don't state whether or not there's AR coating on it, so I don't know, but overall the watch is pretty easy to see in any lighting situation. And last but not least, this watch retails for $2,700, give or take, direct from Sarpaniva watches, or SUF. So moving into the dial here, and I think this is one of the more interesting parts about the watch. And although you can't get this exact dial variation because this is a limited edition 1 of 10 for a local watch group, the, I believe, red dial and maybe one other color variation, I don't remember off the top of my head, go along the similar vein that this dial does. Looking at the dial more generally, we have a pretty simple layout. As you can see, we have these kind of square markers at the 3, 6, and 9 with a triangle at 12. We have these kind of like Arabic but actually custom-made numerals by Sarpaniva himself everywhere else. The 3, 6, 9, and 12 are all applied with Lume. As you can kind of see, they raise above the dial, as well as the pips on the outer railroad track. But all the numerals are done in this kind of silver metallic paint, which and in certain lights it looks pure white, which in other lights it gets this really silver glistening tone, which is a pretty interesting kind of like duality to the look of the watch, and it's kind of fun. Overall, the text is done very minimally. All we have is SUF, Helsinki, and NWC over here at the bottom. I believe the regular production models say 180 instead of NWC, but again, very minimal text. I think there isn't really much to the dial, but all the dial elements shine on their own because everything is well finished. I would say the hands maybe are slightly undersized for the size of the dial. They are very thin and almost very delicate in a way. So I think that is one area that could be improved. And then looking at the dial a little bit more generally, we do see we have this kind of beautiful blue tone that has a slight shimmer and shine to it. It might be hard to kind of recreate under these lighting situations here, so I might have to throw in some live shots, but you can kind of see there is a little bit of speckling on the dial. Hopefully it comes to life a little bit more when we zoom in, but it's really nicely done. There's a lot of attention to detail paid here, and I think under macro it's going to come to life a little more. So zooming in on the dial here, you can see what I was talking about. It has this kind of alternating speckling to it, which if it hits the light bright, it kind of just comes out and actually has this kind of shiny, shimmery quality. And again, if we zoom in on the text here, we can see it has this real nice texture to it, this kind of almost pure white tone that goes to a nice metallic gray depending on the angle and depending on the lighting. And I think that is one of those attention to details that is really nice because it's the same exact printing used for the railroad track here that lines all the numerals and the markers. So there's a lot of consistency here, and it adds a lot of like just dynamicism to the dial overall, because it's not just one flat printed color, it has this kind of changing nature. We can see everything is applied pretty well. I really don't see any imperfections in any way. All the coatings are done really nice. The hands do have this kind of frosted, blasted texture to them, while the second hand actually is polished, which I think it does look good, but I'd rather have seen the second hand also in that blasted finish. But overall, again, no real blemishes in the dial itself. It is all done really, really well, and honestly, for the price point, I wouldn't expect anything less. So it's nice to see that under macro it does hold up really nicely. So taking a look at the SUF outside, we can see in the shade it has this nice kind of matte blue texture, really nice, a little bit of sparkle. Once you actually get it into the sunlight, you can see that subtle sparkliness coming to life, just kind of, you know, coming in and out of viewpoint, and then the grayish sparkliness of the actual numerals and the logo coming out as well, going from that gray tone to those bright white tones. So there really is a lot of just kind of dynamic changingness to the dial, which I really like. And then here, just moving it back and forth, you can see it go from that white to that gray really nicely. So moving on to the case of this watch, it's done very simply, but it's done really effectively. I think one of the most interesting parts about this case is you actually have a concave bezel here. You can see it has this kind of inward slope to it, which adds a really interesting look to the watch. It almost at times looks like it has a double bezel because of that shape, and it's just a nice added detail. More generally, we have these brushed lug tops, just kind of regular straight bushings with a nice kind of chamfer along the edge of the lug here that almost continues into the edge of the bezel. We have also horizontally brushed case sides, really finely done. Very simple case back. I believe the production ones just say the color of the version you're getting, whereas this one says Neighborhood Watch Club 10 of 10, and really just simply done. It is a kind of no frills, but the execution is done really well. I will say this does feel like a finish of that would be expected at this price point. The polishing does shine, better than lower quality watches do. It does pop out at you. It does feel high quality. We can see here that the watch itself is very, very thin, and because it has such a thin mid case with actual lugs that are sloping down pretty nicely, it's going to wear extremely well on wrist. It's not going to feel uncomfortable in any way. Although the crown does jut out a little between the bottom of the case and the kind of the mid case, so in the end it does kind of like dig into the wrist a little more than I'd like it to. And it doesn't have kind of like a complete knurling. It has a knurling kind of towards the base that makes it kind of small and maybe even more sharp than it would be had it extended across the whole crown. So that's just something to note. Very simple case, but very nicely done. It has these kind of like small design elements in like the concave bezel, this kind of slight in turn to the edge of the lug here that gives it kind of a refinement and unique shape versus a regular just straight lug. But moving on to how the watch wears on the wrist. Earlier I was wearing my Vario Empire. They kind of give off the same feel, but this is obviously I think $300 or so watch, and this is a almost $3,000 watch. And there is a certain refinement to this watch that it may or may not be worth it to you, but this does a lot of what you would maybe want it to do for a much more reasonable price point. And here we have the SUF on my 6.5 inch wrist, and off the bat I'm going to say the stock strap doesn't really fit me. This is a really amazing stock strap. It's made of like Nordic elk, I believe, and it's really comfortable, really soft, beautiful kind of texture to it. I do think it's a little dressy for the watch itself. I don't think it matches perfectly. Maybe if they would have done it in more of like a blue or a gray, it would have matched a little bit better. But overall, it is pretty comfortable. It doesn't fit me. Buckle's done nicely. So I'm gonna put it on another strap just so we can get a better idea of how it actually fits. So here we have the watch on this cheapest NATO suede strap. And as you can see, obviously the strap actually fits me. So the watch does plan itself really nicely to the wrist. The lug to lug distance isn't overly long in any way, so it will be able to wear well on a variety of wrist sizes. And as you can see here, when you shift the watch, you kind of get those differences in this kind of like bright white kind of look versus this kind of more silver metallic sheen. And it really just does depend on the light. Sometimes it really jumps back and forth, but in like a really direct light, it's always kind of in this bright white look. And I really like that nature of the watch. It adds more interest than if it was just a flat color. But again, going on to how it wears, it is a very thin watch, so it wears really close to the wrist, so it's pretty comfortable. Again, you can see how that crown is kind of like digging into my wrist, so at times it can become a little bit uncomfortable. Looking from like the top down view, you can see it conforms really well to the wrist, just really hugs down there. So there isn't really anything wrong with the ergonomics of the case. I say the crown should maybe be improved, but overall I do really like how it wears. Even on my 6.5 inch wrist, it fits really nicely. And then even right here, I have closer to a 6 inch wrist. So you can see it still does wear within the bounds. It doesn't overhang. I think it still looks good. It is approaching to be too large, but again, I think it is still wearable. Of course, putting the watch on the classic Archer silicone, I think it pairs well, especially when it's in this kind of bright white tonality. And of course, I just love the strap. There we have it on wrist, plants it really well, makes it even more vibrant, makes it pop even more. This is like the ultimate summer combo. Looks really nice on wrist, I think. Again, this is a super comfortable watch. As you can see there, it barely sits off the wrist at all. So it is just really nice to wear. And because it's kind of so thin, so low profile, and kind of such a large dial diameter, it does feel kind of like a large watch. It feels a little bit larger than the dimensions would suggest at first, which may be good for some people, may be bad for some people. But overall, I do like the wearing experience, and I like the strap. Looming up the watch, you can see that everything is pretty well applied here. I really have no complaints with the loom. It's pretty strong overall for how kind of thin the application is overall. It's pretty legible. There's good orientation because of the triangle at 12. So I think they did a really good job with the loom here, and they did something that not a lot of companies do, which is it glows green, but the loom signature is very, very white, or the loom signature when it's not glowing. So I appreciate SUF for that effort. Looming and comparing to the Timex, we can see they are of similar color temperatures. Timex is a little brighter because, of course, Indiglo, but SUF is still more than serviceable. It's not a loom monster by any means, but you can read it for the most part. So pros and cons of this SUF here, and I think one of the biggest pros of this watch is how thin it is. It wears really comfortably on wrist, other than the little crown issue I mentioned earlier. It is just so thin that it really doesn't have a problem conforming to the wrist. And you kind of sometimes don't even notice it's there, especially if you wear your watches up a little higher. It definitely is super, super comfortable. So it is a nice wearing experience, and I appreciate that. I appreciate companies not just adding thickness for no reason. And then my other pro for this watch will just be kind of the quality in the watch itself. The dial quality is amazing. It does have that kind of sparkly quality, which I hope you were able to see in the video. It is a very subtle aspect to the watch, so sometimes it might not get through the camera as well as I hope it would, but you can tell in person this is a watch of a higher quality. It was paid attention to. It was made with, you know, not too many corners cut, really. And that mentality goes from the dial, it goes to the case. The case does shine. Of course, it is ergonomically thin. It is a well-constructed watch. It's just whether or not this kind of design appeals to you for this much money. Now, going on to cons, I think one of the biggest cons will be this watch is very, very simple. And at times it can even be underwhelming. I think the fact that I went with such a kind of cool, crazy color, which is kind of unique and it's not seen very often, at least in this particular shade of blue, it adds interest to the watch. And it has that kind of like sparkly two-tone nature to it. But not two-tone, but you get what I'm saying. It adds interest, and if it didn't have that, it is a very simple watch with kind of very small and possibly too small of a handset, which can leave kind of the wearer underwhelmed. You're spending close to $3,000 on a very basic watch, and at that point, what is it that you're paying for? You're either paying because you love the design, you love the man behind the brand, or you just got a lot of money. And for most of us, it's mainly because we either really love the watch or we love, you know, the idea of the brand. And for me, it's a little bit of everything, but I think the color was one of the ones that like hit it home for me. One way they could have combated the kind of simple look of the watch would be just blow up the proportions of everything, make the numerals bigger, make the handset bigger, make the text bigger, and it would have given a little bit more visual impact to the watch. Maybe not be what they were going for, but I think it would fit the kind of field watch, military watch style vibe it kind of goes for. My only other con with the watch will really be the crown. Again, the crown isn't the most comfortable, it isn't the most ergonomic. It does stick down below the case a little bit, so it does dig into the wrist because it is a thin watch. It kind of is what it is. It's not something that's a make or break for me, but it is something that I think, especially at this price point, they should find a way around that or find a way to make it a little bit more comfortable. But yeah, it's not the biggest thing in the world. Final thoughts on this watch, and it is a one that I love and I hate. You know, at times I do fall into the category of like, it is a very simple and underwhelming watch. I have other watches that have more visual impact for less, you know, proportion of my wallet. So it is one that's interesting, but you know, at certain times it is just so beautiful. It does catch the light in a certain way. It does shine in a certain way that you're like, yeah, it is a beautiful watch. So this is very much a niche product. It is made for a person who really loves the design and wants this watch, basically. It's the ultimate expression of a very simple watch. And that's not going to be for everybody. It really is a watch that not everybody's going to love. I don't think everyone would go out and buy this watch and be satisfied with it at all. So If you are interested in getting an SUF, I would recommend trying to kind of try one on, because maybe the case shape and the stance won't appeal to you. Maybe the kind of delicate dial elements won't appeal to you. But if you kind of watch this video and you're still pretty into the watch, it is well made, no doubt. It is high quality. It is, relatively worthy of its price point. So at the end of the day, it's up to you. It's your wallet. I'm just here giving you some of my opinions. So I hope you enjoyed the video. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in another one.